everyone. Welcome to Groundwater Talk Live. I am Tom Ballard, the groundwater guy. And today our topic is going to be we're going to talk about supply chain resilience for water systems, and probably a pretty timely topic considering what's happening in Florida with Hurricane Ian right now. That certainly going to be some supply chain disruptions down there. And if you'll recall, a few weeks ago, we talked about actually security vulnerabilities in your water systems. This is another form of vulnerability that we need to assess. And so when you're doing your planning, it's really good to look at things like security vulnerabilities that we discussed and things like supply chain resilience. And what happens if your supply chain gets disrupted? What happens if your chlorine supply does not show up and you don't have any way to disinfect your water to deal with the bacteria? So these are some issues that we're going to talk about today, and that's that's what we're going to dive into now. Before we dive into that, if you can, comment, like, share, it all helps us get the word out and gets us exposure out there, so more people watch the show and we can get some more exposure. So I reply to any and all comments I get. I really appreciate that. But even if you like and share, that helps as well. So appreciate that. All right, so so we're talking about supply chain resilience, and certainly with the whole COVID pandemic shutting everything down, we really saw the vulnerabilities in our supply system, and we're still seeing impacts. We just had a well we're working on in Northern California where we were having trouble getting steel or getting pipe to do the distribution system. So we're still seeing these spot shortages, and it really kind of exposed the whole weaknesses in the system. I guess was when I was working on my MBA. Way back when. This will probably date me a little bit, but just in time inventory systems were really starting to be a big thing back then. And that was the whole system where you don't keep hardly any inventory and you basically just have your supply system down so that you know what you're going to use and you make sure that you get it delivered just in time so you don't have to stock any inventory. Sounds great if your supply chain is working as designed, but we've seen some real weaknesses in the system, as I mentioned, with the whole COVID pandemic, shutting things down, people staying home, people being out of work. It is really the whole just-in-time system has really fallen apart, and we've seen the vulnerabilities of that particular system, or the weakness, I probably should say, of that particular system. So we're really starting to go back and look at things like resilience and do some planning in that regard. So just like we talked about doing planning for our security vulnerabilities, we should really do some planning for our supply chain. We have critical things, we have critical components that we need to replace, and we have critical supplies. Chemicals are being one of those. Chlorine is a biggie, but if you have a treatment system that relies on certain chemicals, those are going to be critical as well, because we're dealing with essential infrastructure here. People can't go without water for too long. So this is really a situation where we need to kind of plan ahead. So there's really and what we're going to talk about today is really based on a recently published paper from the US EPA called Supply Chain Resilience Guide for Water and Wastewater Utilities. So a lot of this information comes out of that paper. I'll post a link to it in the show notes below, but this is something that came out in August of 2022, and is certainly well worth looking at. There's a lot more detail in there than I'm going to provide here. I'm going to outline things and add my own spin on things, obviously. So that's going to be something we're going to look at. Hold on just a minute. I am still having problems getting going on LinkedIn here, and see if we can get this see if we can get this going here. It is just not connecting up, and unfortunately, LinkedIn is always a problem child. It seems like I just can't seem to. It's one glitch after another. Okay, looks like it's going now. So my apologies to the people who were trying to watch on LinkedIn. Uh, we had problems getting connected. I don't know why. LinkedIn just is the flakiest of their live streaming systems. It's just kind of the way it is. It seems like if I have problems live streaming, it's going to be LinkedIn 99% of the time. So anyway, we really haven't yeah, you folks on LinkedIn haven't missed too much. We're going to talk about this paper, Supply Chain Resilience, that the EPA published here in August of 2022. Really good document. It kind of summarizes a lot of actions, and we're going to go through and we're going to summarize a summary. And if you want more details, you can dive into that. So, really, there's multiple sources of supply chain disruption, as we're seeing in Florida right now with Hurricane Ian. Natural disasters can be a biggie. Just think about the water systems that are out there right in the direct path of the hurricane, and what kind of supply chain disruptions they're going to have. So it's going to be challenging. So not only are you going to have storm surges and flooding going on that are going to cause you challenges, but you're probably going to, with road damage and a lot of the stuff that's going on, you're going to see disruptions in getting your chemical feed, and that's probably going to be the biggest. But if you need parts, things get damaged, that's going to probably take some time too. So definitely some damage there, and we're seeing the full brunt of Mother Nature hitting Florida, and thinking about how that affects our water system. Equipment failures, certainly, sometimes our manufacturers and the people we get our supplies from and our chemicals may have equipment failures, and that can lead to longer downtimes and longer lead times on our supply chain, and so that's something we're going to want to look at too, and just monitoring the situation, making sure we understand what our lead times are. Logistics problems. This is something we've seen. So much of our stuff comes from China these days that it's all on a boat somewhere. And we saw in Los Angeles and Long Beach a lot of ships stacked up. They couldn't get them unloaded. There was stuff sitting on these ships for months, and that was really disrupting a lot of supply too. So, um, if in a natural disaster you can have road damage and bridge damage, it's going to create a logistics problem in the transportation of getting that out to these areas. So some of these things are not mutually exclusive, obviously. And malicious acts, we can have data hacking, things like that, and deliberate vandalism that are going to cause supply chain disruptions. So a hacker breaks into your favorite chemical supplier and disrupts their system, and their system is down while they're trying to clean out the hacker's damage and get back online. That can certainly cause disruptions as well, and unfortunately, those things are getting to be more common, and they're just hard to protect against. We've spoken about here. We've spoken about cybersecurity, and we did talk about security vulnerabilities in the past, and that's all part of that. But we can do our own cybersecurity, but what happens is we can't necessarily force our suppliers to do their own, although we can talk about what they have in place and try to work with them on that to let them understand how vulnerable they are, and make sure they have things taken care of, and it may be just something part of your interview process to go out and look at suppliers that really have done what they need to do to secure their own supply chain, so their provision to you is then taken care of. So these are all sources of supply chain disruption that we got to think about, and some of these things are obviously out of our control. Most of them are out of our control, obviously, but it's something we need to take into account as well, and hopefully we can plan for these things. So we're going to break things down here today, and this is the way the EPA paper does. It breaks things down into two major areas: prevention, which is really preparing for a supply chain disruption. So this is the planning process. Make sure you have the steps in place so that you know where you're vulnerable and what you can do about that. And then action is kind of how I put it. That's not how the EPA put it, but I put it down as action because if you're actually in a supply chain disruption situation, now you're going to have to take action. So a lot of the things we planned for in the prevention stage, if you run into actually supply chain disruption, you're going to implement the things you've actually thought about and planned about in the prevention phase. So these one follows from the other, but we're going to break them down and talk about prevention first, and then we're going to talk about basically how you respond by taking the appropriate action. All right, so prevention actions fall into four areas. There's federal and state support, so we can go back and we can look at funding and and regulatory support to kind of build that resilience into the system, uh, and be ready, think things through, plan for eventualities, and get your system ready to sustain a disruption. We don't always know where they're going to come from, so that makes the planning a little bit hard. But we can look at where we're most vulnerable and make sure we've addressed that. And federal and state support, and we'll get into that in detail in just a minute here. But that's one area. Supplier management. Obviously, we talked about when we talked about the sources of supply chain disruption, a lot of those are what's affecting your suppliers, and so whether it's equipment, whether it's your chemical feed, understanding how your suppliers can be disrupted, and then you in turn get disrupted. You need to work with your suppliers to plan things in advance, and don't just take that relationship for granted. We need to actually have an active working relationship with our suppliers. Partnerships, we're going to talk about that. How can we partner with people and other agencies and organizations to make sure that we have mutual aid groups, and in the event of an emergency and a supply chain disruption, we can rely on our partners, and we can provide assistance where it's needed and get assistance where it's needed. And then operational flexibilities. Obviously, in the case of supply chain disruption, being flexible is going to be really important. So we'll talk about that. All right. So grab a drink here. Federal and state support. So a lot of this really comes down to funding. So we get a lot of funding from the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund, or DWSRF, or also known as SRF for short. So they do allow funding. A legitimate use of that funding is for building resilience into your system. So that is, just making sure you have enough inventory on hand. So increasing your stockpile locations, and there are even water agencies that have built their own systems for supplying their own disinfection supplies. So these are some things that SRF funds can be used for, and you should seriously look at that. Part of this would flow from a vulnerability analysis, and that would certainly be something that would be worthwhile submitting with your SRF application. Is we've gone through and done a vulnerability analysis. These are some areas that we need to build up resilience, and this is why this funding is justified. So the state revolving fund can certainly help in that. And I'm going to violate all the rules here. I'm kind of down here looking at my notes, kind of like a newscaster would. So that's kind of violating the live streaming rules. But I'm just want to make sure I'm not really missing anything. So SRF infrastructure, non-infrastructure projects could mitigate the impacts of a future supply chain challenge. So, there's a lot of things that can really go into that. So you can treatment projects to create new facilities that include on-site generation and disinfection, provide reserves when power outages and other emergencies occur, and increase on-site storage capacity. So something I'd already mentioned here. These are all legitimate uses of SRF funds, and like I say, if we've done a vulnerability analysis here, then then providing that as part of your application to SRF is going to increase your chances of getting that fund, those funds. So, and it's important to do that vulnerability analysis. We've kind of dived in here and not talked about how you'd actually conduct a vulnerability analysis, but I think you can see as we go through this what points you touch on and just seeing where your system is most vulnerable. A lot of those things are going to be obvious, but you're going to want to go through and develop a plan and document that because there are times you may get surprised. So, also, if you are taking funds from SRF and other funding sources, USDA, for instance, there is a domestic preference program. So, iron and steel must be must be supplied from domestic sources, and that is that's something that you can get a waiver on. So, so yeah, I've already kind of addressed some of this stuff. I jumped ahead a little bit, but with the SRF, funds can be used for resilience projects, developing system partnerships with other systems in your areas. So this may include interconnections. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Interconnections aren't always possible, but sometimes they are, and these can be lifesavers. If even if you're just down, it may not be a supply chain disruption. It may be some other reason you may be down and need to get some emergency water supply, and interconnections can play a role in that. SRF can be used for that. Self-sufficiency projects and energy efficiency projects. More efficient use of energy is certainly going to help because in the case of things like natural disasters, you may lose power completely, or be on backup generators and those types of situations. So being as efficient as possible is going to make the best use of your backup generators. Okay, so the domestic preference program that I was talking about a little earlier requires use of iron and steel products produced in the USA. Now, we have seen situations, and I know we've been building wells out there, and probably the biggest area we've had supply chain issues is with the casing and the steel, but also just distribution lines and getting the piping for that, because a lot of those are iron and steel products. Those need to be sourced in the USA, and that needs to be documented. If we can document that we can't get these from the USA, then there is potentially a waiver that's available, and we can apply for that and get that and source our materials non-domestically. Obviously, they prefer that it be domestic, but if it's not there, it's not there, and you just need to get a waiver and document that, and you should be fine and keep things moving forward. In the event of emergency, I think these waivers can be pretty quick actually. So, but you need to be on top of that and just document that these supplies aren't available or they're not available for 9 months or a year, and you may be able to get a waiver on the domestic preference program. All right, supplier management. Establishing contracts, identifying backup providers, and confirming production and shipping forecasts. So let's talk about these. So, establish our contracts. A lot of times, smaller water systems, especially, tend to just buy things on as needed, and there's no contracts, so you don't have any preference in the system. So even as a small time water supplier, if you can establish a contract with your major suppliers, then that's going to get you probably a little more priority because they know you're going to be an established customer, and it's going to give you little bit of negotiating leverage if if there's looks like there's supply chain issues coming up. So you may not get everything you want, but kind of get a partial shipment or whatever if you have a contract. So the contract may establish obligations on the part of the supplier to provide you a certain amount, and at a certain price, and that can really be valuable. So we want to look at that and just not buy things ad hoc out there and run down to Walmart and get some bleach or whatever. Probably want to establish contracts with your suppliers and kind of lock things in, because then you're going to get preference in the event of an emergency. And of course, there's going to be times where our primary supplier, the best price guy or the guy we've been working with for a long time and we've had established relationship, just can't get his supplies, and they may be on a boat off of Los Angeles somewhere. We're seeing that less rare, but it is still going on. So in that case, we want to have backup providers identified, and it probably wouldn't hurt to introduce yourself. I mean, it never hurts to get bids and look at other sources as well, but at least have them identified so that if your primary supplier doesn't have what you need, you've identified your backup providers and have the contact information there so that you can go to them and inquire about getting the supplies that your primary supplier may not have, and they might. Sometimes that happens. You just go shopping around and are able to find these things. And something that's important to do is confirm production and shipping forecasts. A lot of times we'll just put in an order, and when it shows up, and there's certain delivery times we expect and we've established. But in situations like during the COVID pandemic, we saw all that the shipping and production schedules just fall by the wayside, and it just became highly erratic and unpredictable. So just sitting there and saying, "Well, we normally get our chlorine delivered every week," and what's going on here. So don't be caught by surprise here. You're going to want to routinely talk to your suppliers, and you can get an idea if there's any upcoming supply shortages by really talking to your suppliers and confirming that these things are going to be available. And that in turn kind of forces them to talk to their suppliers to make sure that everything up the whole supply chain is actually functioning as it should be, or if we're anticipating any disruptions, and then you can start planning for those things and look for backup providers and that type of thing. So this is important to do. It's communication is really what it is, and don't just take things for granted. Now, I'll give you, we're all busy, and some of these things are, do I really need to call and chat with these guys? But in these uncertain times, yes, you do. That's important. All right, supplier management. Having 24/7 emergency contacts and sharing that with your team is going to be important too, because we all know when parts break or you get an emergency, it's never during normal business hours. It never it seems like, or that's certainly a rarity. So I always say it happens at 3 a.m. on Christmas morning, but and I've actually seen that very same thing happen. And so having those emergency contacts is important, because you don't want to just have normal business hours and you call and there's no emergency line, and it's kind of like, so you want to know who your 24/7 emergency contacts are for your suppliers. Very, very important. And supplier priority can be a little tricky. So you want to stress to your suppliers that you are an essential service. and water really is, and that it is really important that you kind of float to the top of the priority list um, because without getting your chemicals or your parts, you're going to be shut down, and people in your water system are not going to be getting the water they need, and this is critical stuff. This is part of that supplier communication is getting to them and talking about you being a priority. And there may be people that they supply to that aren't water systems that maybe would be more willing to cut back or wait a little longer so you could move up the priority list and so very, very important. And then you want to assess your own inventory and demand. How much chemical feedstock are you using? What kind of inventory do you have? Do you have the storage capacity that you need? And really assess that and determine what kind of lead times you could be able to live with. And this is going to help you that if we do get supply chain disruptions, you're not going to be able, you're not going to have to go to your supplier and treat everything as an emergency. Say, look, realistically, I have a 10-day supply on hand. We can stretch that out maybe to 12 days, but we really need to make sure that within that, by the end of those 12 days, that we have our supply, or we're going to have to shut down or do some drastic things. So that's really understanding your own inventory and how much you use. So that's also goes back to working with your suppliers in that regard. Developing realistic delivery schedules. Not everything is an emergency. And if you have your own inventory and you've planned for things and maybe in uncertain times you've stretched your on-site inventory a little bit, then you can really go back and you can look at realistic delivery schedules. And I think your supplier appreciates that and probably give you a little more priority, that if what you're talking about is real, that we really need things within this time frame, and they know that it's not just you're trying to get yourself unjustly prioritized above everybody else, but that you're really managing things properly and you know what you need and when you need it. This is important. Excuse me. Confirm production and shipping forecasts. Once again, this is a matter of dealing with your suppliers and boy, I'm a little scratchy throat here with allergies. And then being flexible. There are sometimes things we can substitute supplies and this and that and suppliers. So you really got to look at those options. If we're in a supply chain disruption situation, then being flexible is going to be really, really important. So we want to, it may be that this part may be a little bit lower quality, but it'll work. We just need to update our asset management plan and replace it a little bit earlier. But in a pinch, this will do, and it'll get us by for a few years until we need to replace it again. And so sometimes you can switch out different chemicals. You can stretch your chemical use out. You can change the purity up. So these things are all things that we got to look at as part of the planning process to be flexible. All right, so partnerships can really, really be important. You're not an island. You're not out there by yourself. If you're closer to a municipality, it's a little more likely you're going to be able to do interconnections and things like that. But even joining a mutual aid and assistance network before a disruption occurs, where you're really looking at forming partnerships with neighboring systems and not even other systems, but people. My next item here is interdependent sectors. So there may be other sectors, business sectors that use some of the same things you do, where you can cooperate with them, and they may not be a water system, but you're using some of the same products, and you may be able to work with them. So Now, the thing with mutual aid is mutual, so don't always just be a taker. You want to get in these things, and you want to help out, and so people are more willing to help you when you have an emergency. So that probably doesn't need to be said, but I'm going to say it anyway um, because it's important, and some people and I think a lot of times it gets done unintentionally. We need some help, so we go ask these guys, and we don't volunteer to help back. So it's important to establish those relationships because once again in uncertain times, and I keep using that term, but we are in uncertain times. It is important to have those mutual aid and assistance networks going, where we can cooperate with other water systems and keep the water flowing. All right, establishing an interconnection agreement. We talked about that a little bit earlier, and certainly SRF funds and other types of fundings can be used for interconnections between systems, and this is not necessarily dealing with system consolidation, but it's establishing an interconnection so that you can, if you have a well, for instance, that goes down that's critical to your system, having an interconnection can allow you to purchase water from a neighboring system that would allow you to keep your tanks full and keep that water flowing until you can get the well repairs made. Excuse me, boy, I'm just little tickle in my throat today. So, and then establish relationships with regulatory agencies and or the governor's office. These can be really vital during the times of emergencies because regulatory agencies can kind of help coordinate between different water agencies and different suppliers and can really kind of intervene on your behalf. And the governor's office can go so far as to issuing emergency proclamations that require certain situations to happen. So maybe they're basically just ordering situations where you can get your supplies or your water systems are prioritized in this situation. So establishing those relationships can be good so that you know the right people to call in the event of an emergency and give them plenty of lead time. My experience working with government agencies is they move slowly. So if you're anticipating an emergency or disruption, the time to be talking to them is when you anticipate that, not when it becomes an actual emergency. Don't wait. Give them a heads up so that you can start working on solutions. And if things get resolved where you don't need to do that, well, so much the better. But it's better to have those relationships so you know who to call and you can rely on them and you've got that established relationship and you can rely on them if you do get an actual emergency. All right, and lastly, coordinate with emergency management agencies and law enforcement. But this can, the situation of what's going on in Florida right now. We're seeing a lot of road damage, bridges being damaged or becoming unsafe, roads being blocked. So law enforcement can help. I mean, they're out there, they're running around trying to do things, and priorities are really important. So if you have worked with these people, they may be able to help making sure that road gets cleared to your facility first, because you are a essential infrastructure, and so they may prioritize getting a road cleared out to your facility before some other lesser prioritized areas, and that's important. But if they haven't communicated with you, they may not know, so you may be farther down on the priority list. So coordinating with these agencies is going to be really important because you want to make sure that as essential infrastructure that you are a priority on these lists and that they understand and have that working relationship with you before it becomes an actual emergency. All right. Operational flexibilities are are important, and these can take many ways, shapes, and forms. So here's a few to really consider. Is one, increasing on-site storage for chemicals. Can we store more? What is the expiration date on the chemicals? How much can we safely store? How much can we store without it going bad or reaching its expiration date? These are important considerations. And do we need funding? Do we need to apply for SRF grant funding to increase our storage of chemicals? If you have extra supplies on hand, extra equipment on hand, spare parts on hand, then that's only going to increase your resilience. So the vulnerability assessment you did before you jumped into this whole process is going to dictate what are your most important parts, where do we need those redundancies, how much extra storage do we need, and we can plan that out. And then if we don't have the room right now, can we make the room? Can we get the funding to do that? So that's important. And here's one that's kind of interesting that popped up that I didn't really think about is consider staff qualifying for a commercial's driver's license. So if you have one or two staff that has a CDL, then they actually could operate a truck where in a critical situation, a supply chain disruption, you may have all your truck drivers that have CDLs occupied. So having your own staff with a CDL, you could go out and rent a truck and move some of your chemical supplies with your own staff. So this is kind of kind of on the outside of looking at emergency situations, but but not a bad idea. Not a bad idea. All right. Develop a water reduction contingency plan. And I believe if you're in California, you have to have one of these in place. Other states, it's a little more optional, but if things get dire, you're going to have a water reduction contingency plan. And that's really going to be a situation where you've identified ahead of time and we talked about this when we talked about security vulnerabilities, is who are your customers that critically need water? Fire flows, those types of things. Some industrial type businesses, if it's an emergency out there, they may not be operating anyway, and they can get by with having their water turned off, and instead you get the flows going to households that need the water. So how can we reduce our water production to the bare minimum and still serve those people that really, really need the water? So having a priority in who needs the water and having a plan to deliver the water to them in emergency under reduced capacity makes a lot of sense. And that plan probably needs to be updated regularly as you get new interconnections and new distribution lines. Things are going to change a little bit, so you want to make sure you have that updated, because when a real emergency hits, you're going to pull that out, you're going to dust it off, and you say, what do we do? Who's our priority? So, and then evaluating the use of alternative chemicals. Can you get by with different chemicals? This probably applies more to treatment systems. Can we do something that's a little less purity, a little bit different chemical composition? Alternative suppliers. So these are things we can look at. Is just having that in place as an option and increasing your flexibility, because in an emergency, flexibility is going to be really, really important. All right, so response actions. Now, we talked about planning ahead for things. Now we're talking about if we're in an emergency situation, a supply chain disruption situation, now we need to act. So the things we talked about during our planning phase, and trying to increase our flexibility and all those things that we just talked about. Now we're putting those into action. So what do we need to consider here? So this kind of mirrors what we talked about, the different categories earlier. So you have some federal support that's available, and some of this is actually kind of interesting. instead of supplier management, now we're talking about supplier communications actually, because it's all those relationships you build up during the planning phase. Now that communication comes into play here, and you're going to really need to work with your suppliers to make sure that you have what you need to keep operating. And then instead of planning out your partnerships and joining mutual aid societies, now's the time to put those plans in action with your partners and coordinate with them and make sure everybody gets taken care of, that everybody participates in the area and everybody takes care of each other. All right, so so federal support really, this comes into play if you can't resolve things at a local or state level first. That's really the place to start. You're going to want to start at the local and state level and go from there. But if you can't get things resolved at that point, then you can go to the US EPA and request direct technical assistance. And there's been some situations, Jackson, Mississippi, that we talked about in a special show, was a situation where the EPA and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers came in, and they were kind of able to fix part of their problems in fairly short order, and they weren't able to handle it on their own, and they brought in the EPA, and that was under their DTA, the Direct Technical Assistance. So, but once again, they're going to want, it's going to take a little bit longer to mobilize the EPA or any federal support because it's a federal government agency. They move relatively slowly. So you're going to want to go locally or state if you can at first and try to get things resolved there. And then if you can't do that, then go to the EPA and see if you can get their direct technical support assistance or technical assistance going at that point. Another interesting thing that in the event of a dire emergency, you can utilize Safe Drinking Water Act Section 1441, and this section of the Safe Drinking Water Act actually allows the EPA to compel a vendor to provide chemical or substance in certain circumstances. So, as essential infrastructure, if you have no sources of disinfection chemicals, for instance, and you can't find them, you can't work with your vendors to get those or get prioritized with those, you can go to the EPA and request them to act under Section 1441, where they can go in and compel a vendor to provide you the chemical or the whatever the substance is. Now, because the government moves slowly, this can take up to 30 days. So you're going to so it's going to be one of those situations where you're going to want to anticipate a little bit, and obviously if you've exhausted your local, state, or your EPA DTA resources, then you're kind of into the process. So it's a little tricky. So you may want to give EPA a heads up, especially when you do the direct technical assistance, and say, look, this may evolve into a situation where we need to employ Section 1441 of the Safe Drinking Water Act, and so kind of getting them on notice and speeding up the process a little bit. But interesting. If I was aware of that, I didn't remember that. So this is obviously is in the case of a dire emergency where they can go in and compel a vendor to prioritize a water system as essential infrastructure over somebody else. So this is where the federal support comes in, and they do have a pretty good hammer here. You just don't want to employ that unless you absolutely need to. All right, supplier communications. Now we've established the relationships earlier. Now we're going to take those relationships and we're going to contact our primary supplier. Hopefully we're on a first name basis with them. We have their 24/7 contact information, and we want to work with them to resolve our supply chain issue. And hopefully we have that relationship built up with them that we can do that. It helps when you contact them to say, look, we're flexible, or to give them the lead times. You absolutely have to have things, so they got something to work with. And they're going to understand, and especially if you've chatted before and they know your situation and what you need and what your normal schedule is, that they'll work with you on that. Supplier communications: contact your primary supplier. We've kind of talked about that. Be flexible, confirm prioritization. Um, this is where we're going to confirm that where we are on the list, and it doesn't hurt to remind them of your relationship and your status as an essential infrastructure. So, trying to get up the priority list here. Um, we're going to want to identify alternate chemicals or reduced dosage options. So, depending on what we're hearing from our supplier, and this is where the communications is important. So, they may have advice for us on identifying alternative chemicals or actually being able to reduce the dosage to get to where we need to go without compromising our disinfection, for instance. And so that's going to be important. And they may have to go back to their supplier, but working together, you might be able to work things out that way and identify an alternative path and maybe getting some chemicals that have reduced purity. You got to up the dosage a little bit to get the same effect, but this is going to be something you're going to have to work out. Remember, we want to be flexible here. So, and you should have identified your alternative suppliers. So this may be the time where you need to contact those alternative suppliers if your primary supplier can't help you with things, and take it from there. So they can help you with that. And they may have something in supply that your primary supplier does not, and so it does not hurt to ask. And if you've established that relationship ahead of time, they may be able to pull something out of their back pocket for you and help you out. So and you're going to want to express your appreciation if they do that, obviously. So. And partnership coordination. So we want to document key information, the chemical equipment, the quantity, the current inventory, whatever we're looking for to help us out during a supply chain disruption. Because if we go to our partners, our mutual aid groups, we're going to want to be very specific on what we need and when, so that they can look and help us out. They may have some extra parts in inventory that are just what we need, or something that may work that you can jury rig together for the time being. But having that specific is really going to be important as you put that information out there, so that people can look at the options that they have available to them and help you out. And then we want to access our mutual aid and assistance. Obviously, like I just mentioned, we're going to want to provide as much detail as possible. And we're going to contact our interdependent sectors, as we talked about in the first section. Is there may be other sectors out there that use some of the same products we do that aren't in the water business necessarily, and so we can see if they can help out too. They may not be critical infrastructure, so it's going to be something where they may be able to lend you something or sell you something that can keep you going, and then they can replace it later. You can work with them to get it replaced for them and go from there. So notify partners of communications with your suppliers. So any partners you have, your mutual aid suppliers, share that information out there with them. So we're going to want to do that and make sure that everybody is operating from the same information basis. You're going to want to contact the emergency management agencies, the regulatory agencies, and/or permitting agencies with detailed information, so they're informed, so that you can get the help that you need. Information is going to be very valuable and is often in short supply during an emergency. So the more detailed information you can provide, the better the likelihood that you're going to be able to get assistance. All right, and request technical assistance from response partners. So your response partners could be, for instance, if you're in California, you are probably a member of the California Rural Water Association. So the circuit riders can be a great resource. Circuit riders know everybody and everything, and they're a great source of knowledge. They can probably steer you to other systems that may be able to help you out, that maybe not in your immediate area, but you may be able to work out some arrangements with somebody and get parts delivered or chemicals delivered from several counties over. And in an emergency, that may be what it takes to get things done. Regional drinking water offices, those are going to be the people that are the regulatory people that are going to best know your particular situation in your area. And then kind of going up the ladder to the state drinking water agency and even the governor's office, who can issue emergency proclamations and can do a lot of things that some of these other agencies and people can't. So that communication is going to be good. But once again, these are all relationships you want to establish before it becomes an emergency, because when you call these people up, you don't want them saying, "Who? What water system? I never heard of you." So that's not good in an emergency. You want them to know who you are, what your particular situation is, and so that they can jump right into helping you and give them good information so they know you're reliable and you're not just panicked, and keep your heads about you, and you're much more likely to get assistance from these people. So, but you want to lay the groundwork ahead of time. I can't emphasize that enough. All right, so that's our talk today. I'm going to have to kind of put this together because we lost our internet connection partway through, and I'll post what you'll probably see on YouTube will be a recording, and I'll kind of paste this last section together with the earlier section, and that's what happens when you live stream. So you can get a hold of me at tballard@Groundwater Guy. I'm also at Southeast Hydrogeology or sehydrogeology.com. That's my consulting outfit, and you can reach out to me there, or tballard@Groundwater Guy is the one the email I use for these broadcasts. So you can reach out to me there, or just leave comments on the video, and I'll respond to those as well. So and I appreciate that. So the comments actually help more. But if you want more personalized stuff, reach out to me at my email. So we stream when it works on the Groundwater Guy channel on YouTube, and on LinkedIn through our event page on LinkedIn. So it works most of the time. LinkedIn can be flaky. The whole system was flaky today, but that's the way it goes sometimes when you're on the internet. We like to have guests on. I'm going to try to start booking some more guests so you're not hearing me talk all the time. This is the link if you want to be a guest and come on. If you got some compelling information to share with the water industry, then I would love to have you on and talk with you as a guest. So this is where you can book that. So, and lastly, thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the Groundwater Guy YouTube channel. Hit the bell if you want alerts of when we have new videos. We do this every Thursday, 9 a.m. Pacific, 11 a.m. Central, and we will see you next Thursday.